Hey, what's up, folks? What's going on? Welcome back. It's time for another episode once again of Eddie G's Comic Culture, and I am your host, the one and only Eddie G. Once again, this show is still sponsored by the great folks over at Black Apparel. Once again, I know Christmas is already over, but this weekend we do got New Year's coming up, and I know a lot of you guys are probably going to be heading out for a party. So if you guys are looking for some pretty fresh, dope gear for you to bring in 2018, make sure you check out their website at www.blackapparelblk.com. Promise you guys, you won't be disappointed. And once again, sending a special shout out to a good friend and brother of mine, Kevin Seawright, thanking him once again for all of the wonderful contributions that he's made towards the show. If you guys are just brand new at this, for your first time viewing, I always drop a shout out to all of my friends and family that have been supportive throughout the entire process of this. And up next, I will be shouting out a good friend of mine, Blu-ray Dan. Make sure if you guys have an Instagram account, you check him out. He's got an awesome page. He keeps it constantly refreshed with Blu-ray 4K updates, new releases, reviews, unboxings. He also has a YouTube channel as well, which has been also a great inspiration for the show of mine. So make sure you guys check him out. He's got some awesome stuff for you to take the time out and review with. Trust me, you guys aren't going to be disappointed. And last but not least, a good friend of mine, Dennis Knight, who is a writer of the Cross comic, which is being published by the indie label out of New York City, Pronto Comics. So if you guys are looking for some new books to check out, and that way you head up your local comic shop, there you have it right then and there. Once again, I'd like to thank all of you guys for tuning in. I hope you guys had a great, happy holidays, very healthy holidays. Hopefully nothing crazy happened. I know a lot of times a lot of families get a little dysfunctional when they get together for these moments, but hopefully it was on my wave, and then it didn't have any kind of it didn't have any crashing waves whatsoever. So actually a great holiday for me, honestly. Very, very quiet, very, very very family oriented, something I haven't felt in a long time. But definitely, like I said, I hope you guys had a great Christmas. Merry belated. I know that's probably not a thing, but it's my show, so I'm just gonna throw that out there. Copyright infringement, copyright infringement. But nah, merry belated Christmas to all those that are just tuning in right about now. So, by last episode, I don't know if you guys have, if you guys remember, I introduced a new segment to the show called "From Consoles to the Big Screens." What video games would you like to see transition into films? And the first episode of it, actually, I discussed a lot of one of the classics that ever came out for excuse me, the Sega Genesis, called Streets of Rage, and I touched up a lot on that. I touched up a lot on that series because it was a very dear series on the Sega Genesis. Excuse me, this coconut nog is kicking my ass right now, but it's definitely one. It was definitely something that was a very close and dear game that I cherished growing up, especially in the '90s, in my teenage years, and I figured, what the hell? I was thinking about it the other day about this next character, and because I actually downloaded it, I went on to the App Store on my phone and I actually downloaded their one of the games, Sonic the Hedgehog 2. So of course you guys should know exactly by now who I'm talking about, Sonic, the blue blur from Sega itself. And I was gonna do I wanted to do basically just to discuss exactly just what I would love to see from it in a film aspect as far as that's concerned. But in all honesty, it's really not much I can really go into. If we've had animated incarnations before of Sonic the Hedgehog, especially for Saturday morning cartoons. I don't know if you guys are probably old enough to remember that, or some of you probably are just not old enough at all to remember it because you weren't even born yet. But there was a Sonic the Hedgehog cartoon that debuted over 20 years ago on ABC. So it was a Saturday morning cartoon, and then it really wasn't much for me to say. It's pretty basic for what it is. It's at this point. Hopefully, if they ever decide to go forward with it, they'll do a lot more. But it was nothing else. It wasn't something I guess it's a cherishable memory, honestly, because I did grow up with it. But it wasn't something crazy, because at that time, anybody had a cartoon. Even MC Hammer had his own cartoon. So with that being said, I do want to see a Sonic movie, but I would love to see a Sonic the Hedgehog CGI film, if anything, with a great cast and a great story revolving the Doctor, of course, involving Dr. Robotnik, or, well, Dr. Eggman now, as he's now known throughout the entire world. But, man, when he came out, first and foremost, it was Dr. Robotnik. I don't know where this entire nonsense of where they switched it up or why Sega decided to switch it up and call him Dr. Eggman. But that ended up being the case. So, there's not too much to touch up on when it really is, to me, and at the top of my mind, at the top of the head right about now, I really can't think of anything to discuss regarding a Sonic the Hedgehog movie. So I decided to really just move this as like a combination of the two. I would love I decided I'd pretty much just envelope that and discuss also a tribute to it, Sonic the Hedgehog. It was one of the most beloved games that I had from growing up as a child, coming into my teenage years. And it was really something. It was really one of the. It stood out the most for me because it was actually the very first video game that I actually beat on my own, basically. And at that point, it really meant a lot to me. It's and particularly so in that time frame, because I was playing a video game, an action platformer, an adventure platformer on a 16-bit system. It wasn't a regular 8-bit and NES. So, but just to give you guys the backstory of it, honestly, Sonic the Hedgehog was really the mascot to rival the Nintendo Super Mario Brothers, and as you guys all know, Nintendo really ran the industry when it came down to it in the 80s. They dominated the home console market, and they basically crushed pretty much all of the competition that they had available, in their way. Funny enough, Sega did have a very reputable and good and very strong. It was a powerful system ready to compete. That was actually a pretty strong competitor for the Nintendo Entertainment System. However, the library wasn't as big enough as NES, whereas NES had like an extensive library that covered all kinds of games back in those days. And and particularly in the 80s, there really wasn't anything that was left untouched at that point. It's just it was just facts basically. But the Sega Master System really did put up a good fight for what it was worth. However, it did fall. It fell, and it ended up having to close up shop, unfortunately. Even though it was still pushing and it was still selling a few units, it sold into the early 90s as I was digging into the history. And the reason why I started digging into the history is, like I said before, when I downloaded Sonic the Hedgehog 2 onto my phone and I started playing, and of course I got flashbacks and memories. It was just like a cascade of my childhood years of playing the game and devoting my entire life to it. Basically, considering that I grew up very sheltered. I didn't really have a lot of friends. I couldn't really go outside too much, considering I came from a religious family. So with that being said, this game was my outlet for reality, and even though and it was between this, my comic books, and my action figures, as well as animation. As I was a big cartoon fanatic as well. So jumping into this game, I really had an idea that it was first and foremost. I was always surprised and shocked that we actually had a Sega Genesis. My older brother was the one who purchased the system, and at that time, Sonic the Hedgehog was just released. It was in 1991. The game was released in 1991, and at that time, Nintendo was still kind of like even though Sega was already was blowing up big time with the Genesis. I mean, they had a lot of great games that were really killing it as far as Toe Jam and Earl, Altered Beast, Sonic the Hedgehog, of course, among others. And Nintendo was still riding a very strong wave of success, and they pretty much, as I said before, they dominated the market. They made sure that, like a lot of companies, pretty much, they had whatever fire that they had around that time was put out by Nintendo themselves. So, with the competition really growing thinner and thinner around that time, Nintendo was pretty much just cornering the market, and of course, everybody loved Mario. The first Super Mario Brothers was legendary. Then the second one made the statement. The third one really was just, was really the bomb for what it was worth. It was a huge deal. And that was one of the best things about games at that time period. A lot of that, throughout the late '80s and the early '90s, video games, especially big name ones, when they were released, it was made like an event. Like commercials, sponsors, and all sorts of things, all sorts of they were all over the place. The media was fantastic with it. They knew how to sell, they knew how to market these games to the public, very much so, and to to much success indeed. So with that being said, when Sonic the Hedgehog Part 1 came out, the fire started to fizzle just for a little bit off of Super Mario Bros. 3, because the year before, I believe Super Mario Bros. 3 was released. And that was a huge tidal wave. That game was another one. That game was a huge event that was pretty historic for what it was worth. And considering the marketing and the promotions that was behind it, it really, really like catapulted Mario to a whole nother stratosphere. So with that, Sega, of course, who was still, putting up a good fight with the Genesis, decided that it was time for them to go ahead and unravel and, one of their mascot. And the only other mascot that was out there was the very short-lived TurboGrafx 16. What was that? The cave? Was it the Caveman? Bonk's Adventure, something like that. That was very short-lived. It didn't last too long. But Sonic did, and it introduced a certain level. First, well, it introduced a level of gameplay that was different from Mario. It was already like, even though it was an 8-bit series, it was an 8-bit series as well, because it did debut onto the Sega Master System in Japan, but in the United States, it was basically the Genesis that catapulted Sonic the Hedgehog to superstardom, and it was like it hit like nobody else. It hit like no other. Everyone bought into it, and we all loved it. We had a brand new character to choose from. Now it wasn't just about Super Mario, it wasn't just about Mario and Luigi anymore. Even though they tried to do a little something with that cave kid Bonk, but it didn't really it didn't really strike the way they thought they were going to strike. So with that being said, when they dropped Sonic the Hedgehog, it was just like a breath of fresh air, and it changed the game. So with that, Nintendo was still pumping, but at that point they were just getting ready to unveil the SNES, which was going to be the next big thing, of course. And obviously Mario was going to be the number one seller. It was a bundled system at that time. Back in those days, it was a lot of those video game systems were bundles. They sold as bundles. They came with cartridges or whatever. Nowadays, you get bundles now, and it's kind of cool that they're bringing that back. But yes, back in the days, those were the bundles for most of the systems. Sega had Sonic, Mario had Nintendo had Mario. So while the hype was surrounding for Super Mario World, Sega was still mastering the next entry for Sonic the Hedgehog, and the rumblings started showing up, the screenshots, and the promotion started very heavy with Sonic the Hedgehog Part 2 at that time. And when finally after the release of Sonic the Hedgehog 2, the staying power of Sonic for that generation, for that era of gaming, really solidified itself. It was one of the best selling games of all time at that point, at some point, and like it really, really stapled, Sonic's character in the universe of gaming and of home consoles. So as as the game was finally released, I remember my older brother picking up a copy, and I started playing it, and I got addicted again. This time, the game, of course, had some changes in this entry. We had a new character by the name of Tails the Fox, who was apparently the partner for Sonic the Hedgehog. Did he really do much? I don't think so. To be quite honest, if I may be so blunt about Tails in Sonic the Hedgehog 2, he was kind of like he was just like a seat filler, I guess you could say. Somewhat of a cheap response towards towards Mario and Luigi. It wasn't really much you can do, even though one of the drawbacks of the original Sonic the Hedgehog game was the fact that it was a one-player game, whereas Sonic the Hedgehog 2 changed the gaming, changed the platform for that as well. However, it was very misleading, because of the simple fact was that it came off that, it was a two-player game, but it didn't really say it was just, unless I overlooked it and skipped over myself, I thought it was like I figured that you could get on the campaign as two players and beat the game together. No, it wasn't. It was a strictly two-player competition. So I was kind of upset about that, and then initially, but for what it was worth, I knew it was it was I was once I got back into playing the game, the game again, and it was back to being just getting on the campaign. All of that erased from my memory. And what was so great about Sonic the Hedgehog was that it offered the gaming alternative of Mario, whereas Mario was just more the focus of Mario's games, of Mario's abilities in his games at that time in particular was him, having a super jump. The man would like leap and leap and bound from spot to spot throughout the stage, and he'd grab a flower or two or a star, or a mega star, and you'd see him. So yeah, whereas Mario would pretty much just like grab a megastar and just power on through each stage or so on and so forth. And yet those were great games. I love the Mario games. Don't get me wrong, I grew up the Mario games are always going to be legendary. But they will never be, there will never be another rivalry like Mario and Sonic the Hedgehog was. So when Sonic the Hedgehog 2 came out and all of these changes were made, and it was an awesome improvement, and it was a consistency that was actually noted throughout, pretty much noticeable throughout all of the games, because they were all, they all grew from one point to the next. It was pretty. That's why I love, that's what was so awesome about the Sonic the Hedgehog series. So when Sonic the Hedgehog 2 came out, and as I said, the only thing that was really upsetting about was the two-player. There was no two-player campaign. It was just a two-player battle mode. But after a while, like it was the next Sonic. It was the next video game, that me as a kid by myself, I beat it by my own, on my own. And each one of the levels were just each one of the levels were of course different, and they had like 3D aspects of it. Well, 3D at the time, of course, but each game started off as something unique. The first one, it was pretty. It was just it was innovative. It was brand new. It led the mascot scene to to a whole, it brought it to me. It brought it full circle. It made it to a whole nother level. It made it so that Mario had someone to finally actually worry about as far as Nintendo was concerned, for a character having a mascot rivalry. And it really brought that it really brought that to a whole nother level when it came down to seeing which was the better system, which one was the better game, who was the better character, who was more liked, and so on and so forth. So one of the and what was so great about the Sonic the Hedgehog games, what separated that from them, was a lot of the aspects as far as like they had a they had a saving spot. This was before Mario, of course, but like they had a save points in the game where if you went past the lamppost, that was the last spot. It was like your little mini saving that was like your mini save slot for the game. And if you had enough rings, it would teleport you to a special stage for you to grab the Chaos Emeralds that of course Dr. Robotnik at that time, well, Dr. Dr. Eggman, I call him Dr. Robotnik. Dr. Robotnik was after. So of course, and Ken, he it really, like, it brought a breath of fresh air into this, it really brought a breath of fresh air into the gaming, into games, and as far as characters were concerned, because like I said, Nintendo still had a stronghold, and it had a very big stronghold when it came down to the Mario games. So digging into what made Sonic so great was it had that engine it had that built-in engine for the Sega Genesis, where it enabled him to go ahead and travel at super speed throughout the stage. They also managed to utilize 3D graphics later on in the series, starting in Sonic the Hedgehog 2, of course, when they had those the save posts that I mentioned, when you would jump from the next dimension to the special stage, and it was time for you to go ahead and endure some sort of challenge for you to go ahead and grab the Chaos Emeralds. So Sonic the Hedgehog 2 for me was a benchmark sequel. I thought, there was a couple of there was a couple of sequels that stepped the game up as far as video games were concerned at that time, but Sonic the Hedgehog 2 was definitely a top contender. So once I finished beating the game, and then of course I got the cheat codes to play a Super Sonic as well, which also made the game, which made the game fire. It made it lit for me, honestly. I had a fun, I had a blast playing a Super Sonic, as it was just like having like an OP character just go black, just destroying everything in its path, just like nothing. It was amazing. But after I defeated Sonic the Hedgehog 2, and I beat the whole game, and I was still constantly playing it. The replay value of it was so immense. It was amazing. I was and especially once I started realizing, especially when I had the cheat codes to play Super Sonic, it was even worse. So it was an addiction, and at that time, when I had free time, when I wasn't playing, I started thinking about the next entry to the game. Like, what's Sonic? When are they going to drop Sonic the Hedgehog 3? What's gonna happen with Sonic the Hedgehog 3? Are they going to change anything with Sonic the Hedgehog 3? What changes are they planning to put into the game? And so, of course, they made it an event. And Sonic the Hedgehog 3, after for what seemed like a long period of time, Sonic the Hedgehog 3, I believe, was released in 1993. And I'll never forget, we never bought it. My brother never purchased that. That was the only copy of the Sonic games out of the Sonic franchise he never purchased was Part 3, which is ridiculous because to me that was the greatest. It was the greatest in terms, to me it was one of the greatest in terms of breaking down the barrier and being new and different. Because I remember playing Sonic the Hedgehog 3 for the first time, and then I remember going through the first stage, the first zone, and automatically it's Sonic that you can, it's already established. Super Sonic the Hedgehog is acknowledged in the universe as it is in the beginning of the game as you see him, and one thing that I noticed immediately was the world's changed. Well, first and foremost, let me start off with the change from Sonic the Hedgehog himself. His appearance was completely different. He was much shorter than in the previous, than in the previous entry in Part 2, and he was a little lighter. He wasn't that dark Pepsi blue that he was in Sonic the Hedgehog 2. So that was a pretty decent change. Tails was the same. He looked exactly the same. He never changed at all. They never changed the design at all throughout the entire series. So it wasn't no big surprise there, and it's not like anybody really cared anyway. But of course, the addition of a new character, Knuckles, was a big deal, and this was a new villain for Sonic to actually go ahead and have a problem with that was actually good enough that could be like his equal match, and it really like set a precedent now. Like now we're getting to see a universe of all these characters together between Knuckles, the Echidna, then of course, and then much further down the line with the other characters like Amy and Shadow and so on and so forth. But my emphasis on this is basically on the early games of Sonic. My emphasis is basically on this episode of Sonic the Hedgehog's early life in the 16-bit era and the success that it carried. He has been, a key member as far as like a lot of kids' childhoods, a lot of people's childhood are concerned, especially people in my age demographic and so on and so forth. A little bit. Then you got people that are a little bit older as well that are just like that also play the game, that also have fond memories. They just don't go as hard as a lot of other people do, but it is what it is. So, with the main focus being on that, I wanted to really touch up exactly what made these games so great. And every time that these games were released, it was all an event. And as far as Sonic the Hedgehog 3 was concerned, it was introducing a new character to the franchise, and something to grow along and step further. Now, as I said before, the changes were noticeable in Sonic the Hedgehog 3 the most because the worlds became much more vivid, they became much more elaborate, they became much bigger. A lot more designs were put into the backgrounds. A lot more of the music was a major change into the game as well. Like a lot of the soundtrack was totally different. It was completely changed. It was completely reworked from the previous two games, and it wasn't. It was a pretty welcoming change, to be quite honest. It took a little bit for me to get used to it, but then I started hearing it for what it was worth every time I played the game. And as the levels moved on, I started hearing the beats coming in, and the production value started becoming much more evident. It was awesome. So it set the tone, it set a precedent. Now it was a new level for Sonic the Hedgehog games, and it made it much more exciting for it, because you would be that much, it would build the anticipation up to something, better for the future coming up. And of course, that was the name of the game. That was the name of the game once they dropped Sonic and Knuckles in 1994. Now, Sonic and Knuckles, which was a major thing, it was again another major event. It introduced a new technology. Um, Apparently, Sega had, the Sonic team at Sega at that time had plans of introducing the Knuckles character quite early on into the franchise. And so what they did was they basically had this lock-on technology to the cartridge, which enabled you to play. You could connect Sonic the Hedgehog's Part 2 or Part 3 to the cartridge of Sonic and Knuckles, and it would enable the character of Knuckles, the agenda, to be playable in both Sonic 2 and Sonic 3, which was awesome. It was pretty badass. Apparently, it gave like a whole new it gave like a whole new replay value for those games, to be honest, because of the fact that you could play a new character at this point. And again, the soundtrack was still badass. It was continued from the third. It was continued from the third entry, and it was just it was an incredible piece of work right there. So, also another thing I wanted to touch up on. One of the reasons that made the Sonic the Hedgehog 3, the soundtrack so different and so much, so something, so it made it one of the main things that made it stand out so much was one of the producers was actually Michael Jackson. One of the producers for the he actually was one of the producers for the music in the game. And apparently, but unfortunately, he wasn't too crazy about the sound system of the Genesis and how it would, how the game came out. So I guess he turned away from it and didn't want to do it. Didn't just he said he just didn't want his name attached to the credits, which was all right, I guess. No matter what, I mean, it would have been it would have been much better for the game if his name actually was attached to the credits. To be quite honestly, Michael Jackson was still a pretty big name at that time, and him having being tied to a Sonic the Hedgehog game in itself like that direct would have, shit would have been gone on fire, bro. But it was a pretty bad. It was one of the major shifts of change, one of the major shifts of direction for the Sonic character himself. And it looked like after Sonic and Knuckles with that, and the soundtrack was incredible. First of all, the Mushroom Hill Zone, one of my favorites, as well as the Flying Battery Zone, also another awesome music for both stages. And it looked like at that point, for the time being, that it was going to be going to a positive direction with the franchise. However, at that point in the mid '90s, the next generation consoles were now being prepped for introduction. We already 1995 already saw the emergence of the PlayStation, the PS1, and Sega was about to move on to the Sega Saturn. Nintendo was about to move on to the Nintendo 64. However, Sony's entrance into the game really created such an earthquake, because a lot of people, I guess a lot of them didn't really think that it was gonna, Sony was gonna make it that far, because prior to Sony's release, there were other big name companies that were trying to make their name in the home console industry, but none of them panned out. From the Panasonic 3DO, the TurboGrafx 16, the Neo Geo, and then of course what was that? Even Atari with its Jaguar went nowhere. So when the PlayStation dropped in '95, and then it took a lot of people to realize that they weren't joking around. They were a pretty heavy contender with the library of games that the PlayStation was developing. Things started shifting, and what seemed to be the major competition between Nintendo and Sega had emerged immediately, had changed drastically. Honestly, it went from Nintendo to Sega, from Nintendo versus Sony, and because the Saturn was supposed to see the next birth of, I guess the Saturn was actually supposed to be the next level of seeing the next rebirth of Sonic the Hedgehog, but the Saturn sales were struggling so much so that it was almost impossible to try to get anything really great going off on that, and I don't think the game never made it out, and the game never made it to its release, which was very unfortunate. So between 1994 to like 99, we really didn't see any more Sonic the Hedgehog games, which was pretty upsetting for what it was worth. Because when the Nintendo 64 came out, that's when we saw the new emergence of Super Mario 64, and Mario now in completely 3D, and he made the transition much more successfully than than Sonic the Hedgehog himself. Of course, when I mentioned that time period where we didn't see Sonic the Hedgehog up until 1999, it's because basically Sega decided to release one final system, the Dreamcast, which was actually a very very well versed. Again, much like the Sega Saturn, it was a powerful console. It was a very good. It was able to be strong enough to hold its own with the competition. The only thing is that the third party support really wasn't there so much, and it kind of really tainted a lot of what was coming up in the future, and it did something right because the Sonic team actually did introduce the Sonic Adventure games, which was great, and it looked like Sonic was back for good. It really did. But then Sega, of course, folded. And then they announced that they were no longer going to be creating any more home consoles. As far as they were concerned, they were just going to sell their properties off. They were going to produce games for the other, for all multi platforms now. Nintendo finally got to see Sonic the Hedgehog games on their platform, which was a joke that we used to make as kids. Like, oh, we'll never see that happen. Like Super Mario and Sonic the Hedgehog in the same game being sold for the same system, that'll never happen. And look, not even it wasn't even a 10-year, it wasn't even a 10-year wish away from it either. But after Sonic Adventure and Sonic Adventure 2, and with the demise of the Dreamcast, we started seeing a dip in quality in the Sonic the Hedgehog games. A lot of it has been pretty lackluster. There's been quite a few titles ever since those Sonic Adventure games have come out, and let me be honest with you, a lot of them haven't been good at all. A lot of them haven't really been skimming the surface of mediocrity, so to speak. Between shoddy gameplay and less than stellar graphics for what should be a lot more advanced as far as they're concerned, and I do agree with them on that. Like, it doesn't seem like there's much changes going on into that field. I don't know what's going on because as I said before, this was a revered character. Sonic the Hedgehog was a big name mascot in the '90s, in the early '90s. He was the only one that actually provided some sort of competition for Nintendo when Nintendo was reigning supreme, and all of a sudden, like, it was just, the legacy was just torn down. It was gone, and it looked like for some, it looked like for a small second that it looked like for a glimpse. It looked like they had the science broken down already. It looked like everything was going to come together, like with Sonic Generations when they decided to do that cross of two universes with the 3D Sonic and of course the side-scrolling 2D version of Sonic the Hedgehog as well. And it looked pretty cool. It was like a flashpoint of the Sonic, of the Hedgehog universe. So who would have known? It would look like it was actually going to someplace promising. But then again, the following releases haven't, of course, been right back to the same, poor reviews, poor gameplay, and pitiful excuse for graphics. Like, it doesn't seem to be like the developers behind the Sonic games as of now versus to what they were back then. This is two totally different worlds, and I understand it, but I'm gonna say they're too different in the sense of the ambition. It seems like they don't have the ambition to create the right, to create the right story for him to have a great game, I'd say it's time to take it back to its roots. Mario had a success with the Super Mario Brothers U 2D side 3D, 2D 3D side scrolling platformers. Why don't we return Sonic to that form, to that era for a little bit, to remind the fans exactly what made him so great. Because a lot of the recent works that they've been dropping, and even now with the recent Sonic Forces, that looked like I had fingers crossed for that entry, and it wasn't received well at all. And every one of them generate the same exact response as of recent. Of course, it's been mixed to lackluster reviews. So I'm really hoping that at some point we could get some great writers and great developers behind to create a great gaming experience, similar to what was available back in the '90s when we were kids. When I was a kid, myself. Because it would really suck to see this character go out with such a whimper when he deserves so much more. I mean, Mario has made, if Mario has survived this long, so, Sonic the Hedgehog can as well. They just got to give him the right, they just got to put out the right material for it. But before we start seeing any sort of film adaptation, as much as I would like to see as much as I would love to see a CGI or Pixar Sonic the Hedgehog kind of game, excuse me, movie. I would love to see first that the gaming universe gets placed, and in the right, placed in the green. To be quite honest, because so far it's been in the red, throughout the last, I would say, more than 10 years now, 13 years. It's pretty bad. It's pretty bad. It's not a good look, man. It's really not a good look. And like I said, Sonic the Hedgehog, I truly believe is a character that deserves so much more than what they've been giving him. So I really hope that whatever development team is behind the next entry is really doing something to turn it around. But then again, that's and it sucks, but then again, it is what it is. That's all we have is that hope, because we can continuously hope for the same thing. I know I've been tired of hoping for the same thing, but at some point, if it does drop, when it does drop, I want to be, I want to be there to witness it. I want to be there to enjoy that. I want to be there to take in the excitement and the anticipation of that, because it deserves that. The character, for what the character did for me coming up as a child, I can't doubt that. I can never deny that. So I will always love Sonic the Hedgehog for what it's worth. Even though a lot of people don't like the recent games throughout the last 13 years or so. There was a time before that where the character was really just something truly magical and offered something so much more different than what other gaming system, what other consoles at the time had to offer themselves, even the arcade. So hopefully we can get that back on the right track. If they have to flashpoint the bitch, then flashpoint. but hey, everybody's screaming reboot. What can you do? But that's basically just about it, really, that we can all do, guys. But I guess that's about enough time of me talking shit. But thank you all once again for tuning in. Once again, thank you guys for all the love and support that you've shown. Once again, I hope you guys have a wonderful holiday. Enjoy your New Year's coming up this weekend. Please don't try to kill your families, or if you're going to party out for the final week of 2017, make sure you go out with a bang, but go out with a bang responsibly. But other than that, much love to all of you guys out there and to your families. May you guys have a healthy, happy holidays. And once again, you already know the drill. If you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, you already know where the comment section is at. Hit me up. This is a forum. We are here for conversation and discussion. Hell, even some debates here and there. So until the next time, I'll see you guys. Take care of yourselves. Peace.